Did they showed you that? Okay. 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 Go ahead and start it whenever you want, and I'll let that quiet the crowd.
Of urgency that we all must do something.
We shouldn't feel defeated.
We can do it.
Perpetual planet means protecting nature as if our lives depend on it.
We have to keep hope alive.
How can we use our skills to solve these global problems?
I love for my research to have an impact in the life of people.
It takes a collective effort from all of us to inspire, to educate.
Putting all the knowledge together.
Más gente involucrada, más gente.
We are not going to stop until we get the job done.
It was just the beginning. Fantastic.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to see everybody here today. This is a big day for me in particular, being a bird type. This is the first time in 9 years we've been able to use a bird as one of our ocean-related species, and I think we couldn't have made a better choice than the osprey. And not only could we have not made a better choice than the osprey, but the person here who's come home after a long absence is Alan Poole. Alan Poole is a lifelong researcher. He worked as an associate at the Cornell Ornithology Lab, where he was the editor of Birds of North America Life History Series, 18 volumes for 22 years. He has chased ospreys all over the United States. He was in Finland earlier this year, I think, doing it. He's been in New Zealand. And the one thing I think about it, everybody knows the osprey, and everybody thinks of the osprey as their local bird, but ospreys are global. And they're a remarkable creature that, like the eagle, they suffered a serious decline with the DDT-related issues, but have made a remarkable comeback as well. And so I'm very happy to be able to introduce Alan, and we'll hear what he has to say.
Thank you, Alex, and thank all of you for coming. What a treat to be here. What an honor to be here. What a storied institution. It has been many, many years since I set foot in this place. It's a delight to be back, and it's a delight to be an Osprey ambassador. I never realized I was an Osprey ambassador. I've kind of been one, I guess, all my life, but now I have an official title, and I really like that. When you think about ospreys, one of the things that reaches out to me is how remarkably tenacious it is in seizing the human imagination. There are a handful of birds on this planet that have done the same thing. We could name a dozen, but ospreys are up there among them. And there's some very good reasons for that, and I'm going to basically be talking to you about that this afternoon. But first and foremost, they lead very conspicuous lives. We can see how they live. We can see where they nest. We can see how they catch fish. And they don't mind living around humans. So as you're going to see, those are sort of the three themes that I think will emerge from this talk tonight. But who better to start us off than John James Audubon? Because not only have ospreys captured our imagination, but if you go back in history, you discover that they were equally loved and admired in the 1830s and 20s and 30s and 40s when Audubon was painting. Of course, this is one of his real masterful paintings. He did a lot, but this is one of the handful that really stands out. And it captures a lot of what makes an osprey an osprey. The fact that it's that it's eating live fish. This is a bird that lives almost exclusively on live fish. It has the ability to carry the fish aerodynamically. And most of all, it stands alone. There are very, very few birds of prey that live exclusively on live fish. Some people ask me, well, how about the bald eagle? They take a lot of fish, don't they? And they do. But the bald eagle also takes lots of other things. It'll take mammals, it'll drop turtles and kill them. It'll eat a lot of carrion. And it also is not above heading to a garbage dump every once in a while, especially when the weather gets cold and it's the middle of winter. Keep in mind, Ben Franklin, when we were trying to decide, this country was trying to decide what its national bird was going to be. And pretty much everybody wanted the bald eagle. But Franklin knew that for one thing, they stole fish from ospreys. And for another one, they didn't mind hanging out at garbage dumps. And he basically said, this is a bird of low moral character. Ospreys are not birds of low moral character. Think of how evolution has honed ospreys to be able to catch and hang on to fish. Any of you who are fisher people, if you've ever brought a fish into a boat or brought a fish ashore and tried to pick it up, lots of luck. It's really hard to hang on to a muscular fish that is writhing around. Ospreys have solved that problem beautifully. Look at those claws. Those are continually being sharpened as they grow out. So naturally, they are sharpening themselves as they grow out. Not only that, the base of the pad of that foot is like sandpaper, like very rough sandpaper. So they have an much easier time hanging on to a fish they've just snatched from the water than they would if they hadn't been so equipped. So this is what evolution has done for them. The other thing to keep in mind is this is a bird that has a really broad range. Let's start here with North America. It's both a fresh and a saltwater bird. So it's nesting from lakes and rivers in Alaska, all the way over through the boreal forests of Canada, over to Newfoundland and Labrador, and then down along our coast, all the way to Florida. And on the west coast, down along that coast, all the way to Baja California. Almost all of these birds, these North American birds, are migratory, and we'll see more about that. The only ones that aren't are the very southernmost Florida and the Baja birds. They tend to stick around all year long. One of the main things about ospreys is they build, like many other birds of prey, they build huge nests, and it's an investment. This is a nest that they use year after year. This is what they come back to. So when they migrate, they'll leave for 6 months, and they'll come back to this same nest year after year after year. And think about it. Look at the nest that's there. How many sticks in that nest? I mean, you can't begin to count them. Tens of thousands. Each one of those sticks is one trip by a male osprey. The male is the one who gathers the material. The female does the arranging once it's up in the nest. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Anyway, it's a big investment, a lot of time, and obviously once you've made that investment, you're going to hang on to it. It doesn't make sense to come back and build a new nest every year because it sets you back. And the early bird gets the worm. The early osprey, one of the things I've discovered in my years of monitoring osprey reproductive success is the early birds are the ones that produce the surviving young that come back to nest in our area, in our colony. Makes a big difference. One of the huge changes that's happened to ospreys in my lifetime, and really in the last, let's say, 100 years, is that they have proven remarkably adaptable to nesting on artificial sites. This happens to be in Germany, but these are high tension lines. These towers are about 120 feet tall. They're way up there. The Germans, the conservation people in Germany, ornithologists there have built, if you look very carefully, you'll see there's a little tiny basket underneath that. So they've helped accommodate these poles. And there are miles and miles of these poles with an osprey on about every third one. Not only that, they have adapted to our industrial civilization. This is Kennedy. This is your home turf. This is Kennedy Airport. There are ospreys nesting on the ground in Kennedy Airport, believe it or not. And there are good reasons for this. Right over, those of you who know this area, half a mile away is Jamaica Bay, some of the most fertile and fish-rich waters that we have along our coast. So ospreys do fine here. So next time you're flying into Kennedy, look out your window and see if you can find it. The other thing, and something that's near and dear to my heart, because these are the birds that I've been working with, are salt marsh ospreys here in Massachusetts, New England, where I live, southern New England, but all along our Atlantic coast, people have been building these nesting platforms out on the salt marshes, and it turns out they're just perfect places because the ospreys love being out there. Historically, they wouldn't have been able to nest on these marshes because they would have tried, and occasionally they would have succeeded, but high water would have washed them away. So what they need is something that just gets them up above the high tide, and then they do beautifully out there. It's amazing how wild these salt marshes are. Those of you who live around them know what I'm talking about. I mean, I live on a fairly crowded coast, but the moment I get in my boat and step out onto those marshes, it's a different world. And everything fades away. There may be a road in the distance, there may be a couple of houses, a truck backing up, but out there, you realize it is untouched. People don't touch marshes. And so they've turned out to be a remarkable place for ospreys to settle in and nest. Where I live, for instance, just to give an example, there are 100 pairs of ospreys nesting within 3 miles of my house on salt marsh platforms like you see here. So these are community efforts. Overwater nests are favorites of ospreys, and so here again they've adapted to artificial sites. These buoys, this happens to be Columbia River in Oregon, but it could be Chesapeake Bay. It could be any number of bays and estuaries up and down our coast. And it's as if the Coast Guard had been hired to build nest sites for ospreys. The ospreys have thought they've died and gone to heaven. They just love these sites. Totally predator-free. And disturbance-free as well. Last but not least, this is sort of the ultimate osprey nest. I forget what a cell tower costs to build, but it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to put one of these up. As soon as they get up there, ospreys are on them if they possibly can, if there are ospreys around. They love cell towers. I think the statistic I heard, Florida has something like 5,000 pairs of nesting ospreys now, and roughly 20 to 30% of them are on cell towers. Okay, we mentioned a global species. This is really important. North America, we've talked about those birds, our birds here in North America. Most of them are wintering. They spend at least 6 months down in, mostly in the Amazon, in northern South America. A little bit in the Caribbean, a little bit in Mexico, but most of them go all the way down into northern South America. There's a European subspecies right here, all the way from Scotland to Japan, down, even down into along the coast of into the foothills of the Himalayas, and a little bit over here into China. These birds, most of them are nesting in Africa, across the Sahara, across the Sahel, and into, especially along the coast of West Africa, but in lakes and rivers in Central Africa as well. One of the things that distinguishes ospreys are their epic migrations. So we just talked about these birds that are going to Africa and to South America. This gives you a little bit finer tuned look at North American ospreys in the area where I live, in southern New England. These are all done with satellite trackers. So these are birds, over 100 of them, over a period of a decade, in the early 2000s and up through up to about 2015, were outfitted with these little backpacks that essentially were GPS devices that communicated with the satellites. So you had a reading on where each individual osprey was every minute. This was just transformative. We had never had that kind of information before, and all of a sudden, we had a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, even minute-to-minute look at where these birds were going, how they got there, and what they did when they ended up on their wintering grounds. The thing to notice here is how spread out. These are all of these are dots show where birds are actually spending the winter, where they settle in and spend the winter. These are the tracks that show their migration, and notice how they're from all over stretches of northern South America here, most of the Amazon. They are all funneling right through that one location, and it's right at the border of Venezuela and Colombia. There's a little peninsula that juts out there about 20 or 30 miles, and ospreys take advantage of that. They have to jump the Caribbean, so that's all over water, and then Cuba, Dominican Republic, on through Florida, and it's as if they're on rails from here on. They're all flying exactly the same route right up into New England until they spread out from there. So Alex mentioned this, the pesticide story a little bit. A lot of you are probably familiar with it, but it's worth remembering this story because ospreys played a pivotal role, a central role in defining how ecosystems are put together and how pesticides move through ecosystems, how they are concentrated in the top of ecosystems. So ospreys were a great barometer. They were showing us what was going on in animals that were lower down on the food chain. So basically, the quick story is DDT was invented in World War II to delouse troops. They sprayed the troops to keep them from getting too covered with lice. It was remarkably effective. It was the first war soldiers had not been covered with lice most of the time, so they were thrilled. And actually, DDT has very low impacts on warm-blooded on mammalian systems. So it wasn't a big issue. What it did do is accumulate. And from there, it went on to be sprayed. Once the war was over, it went on to be sprayed as an insecticide. It became the go-to insecticide, particularly in communities that lived along the coast where salt marsh mosquitoes were a big pest. So all of a sudden, for not much money, you could have a plane fly over your beach house, your marshes, twice or three times a summer and zap them. And it was great. You didn't have a lot of mosquitoes. But as we all know, life is never that simple. And so gradually, as these were building up in coastal and salt marsh food chains, it became a real issue. And of course, the person who sounded the alarm more than anyone else, Roger Peterson, who I just showed you, was a great bird. He was a bird guide writer, and he was sort of the father of ornithology, of bird watching for North America. He lived along the Connecticut River and noticed right away that the nests that he was used to seeing young ospreys in at the end of the summer were empty. So he began to sound the alarm, but the person who really sounded the alarm, of course, was Rachel Carson, who in the last years of her life took a courageous stand. She took a lot of flack for putting the word out that really these pesticides were not the panacea that we thought they were, that people thought they were. The chemical companies came after her. A lot of the political world came after her, but gradually, the evidence was so amazing that it was impossible not to realize what was going on. Ospreys were at the forefront because they lead these conspicuous lives, because their eggs weren't hatching. All of a sudden, people could stand up and say, "Look, we have evidence. We have 30 years of studies on ospreys," and all of a sudden, as soon as the pesticides came in, they are no longer reproducing. Not only that, they were able to measure the eggs and show that there was a lot of DDT in the eggs. So this was really the 50s and the early 60s when this was going on. There was a period of a decade and a half when ospreys along our coast, the New England coast, and a lot of the Atlantic coast were simply not reproducing or reproducing at very, very reduced levels. New York City to Boston had about 1,000 pairs of ospreys nesting on it along the coast. That's, Long Island, Connecticut, Rhode Island, southern Massachusetts. About 1,000 pairs between New York and Boston in the 1950s. By the 1970s, that was down to 90 pairs. This is what Massachusetts looked like in the 1970s. Almost all the nests were concentrated just down in this section of southeastern Massachusetts. 30 years later, this is what it looked like. Remarkable recovery. As soon as the pesticides were turned off, and ospreys were a big part of making that happen, and political clout was a lot of what made that happen too. Think about it. This was an era in which a lot of the major environmental legislation of North America was written in the early 70s. And a lot of it came out of the alarms that were raised, not only because pesticides were having the terrible impacts that they were, but also because people finally figured out how dirty our waters were and how many birds were being and other animals were being killed. So this is what it looks like, and now this is what 2000. This is very much out of date. It's just packed. There are also ospreys all through the interior sections of Massachusetts. And this is true for Connecticut. It's true for Rhode Island. It's true for Long Island. It's just been a remarkable resurgence. So quick look at the numbers here. We're down to 20 or 30 pairs in the 1970s in Mass, all pretty much in one or two or three places. By 2023, we had almost 1,000 nesting pairs of ospreys in Massachusetts. A great success story. One of the things I like to remind people, although not my friends who are really dedicated fishermen, I don't usually show them this slide, but I think I can get away with it here. I want to remind you, 1,000 pairs of ospreys eat a lot of fish. I'm talking here about 600 nests. What are we up to? 300, almost 400,000 fish just during the nesting season. Community, maintaining the nests has been a huge plug for community environmental outreach. Here you see a family. This is a family that lives fairly close to where I do. They're out there every fall helping to maintain the nests. Mass Audubon has been a big part of organizing this, but I think it's one of the things that we should keep in mind, how ospreys are great at really pulling a community of people, of like-minded people together to keep these birds on track with nest sites that are really going to work for them on down the line. Not only that, just to show you how far we have come from ospreys, there is now a guy in Oregon with a business called Osprey Solutions, LLC. This is a guy who's putting his kids through college by contracting, having people come to him that have what we call problem nests. Here's a nest on a ball field in Connecticut. The ospreys were starting to put the lights out, and they couldn't function as the ball field at night. So they called up Osprey Solutions, and he immediately faxed them some plans, told them how to do it, and he's doing this all over the U.S., all over North America. Not just lights, but especially power poles. Power poles are where ospreys get into a lot of trouble. They love to nest on them. When they're hot wires, they can get in big trouble. Not only does it kill them, but it also shorts out the wires. So people are looking less auspiciously at ospreys when their lights are going out every other night. Anyway, the take-home message here is that ospreys are back in a big way along, we're lucky here in the Northeast, and it's true in a lot of the rest of North America. Other parts of the world we'll talk about in a little bit. It's not quite so rosy, but it's still a pretty encouraging sight. When I show this slide, I usually tell people that I will buy a case of beer from anybody who can pronounce any of these words correctly and tell me what they mean. I thought I knew I could get away with it. This is Finland. You're in Finland. Lots of luck pronouncing Finnish words. Really, really tough. Finland is one of the heartlands of osprey territory in Europe. It has along with Sweden, it has these huge boreal forests, and it's one of the places where ospreys lingered on. Europe didn't have the pesticide problems, but it had a lot of people shooting ospreys and trapping ospreys. They were seen as vermin because they hunted fish out of fish ponds, and Europe depended heavily on farm fish, going way back to medieval times. So a quick look at Europe. You can see we're going from Scotland, or the heartland is right here in these boreal forests in Norway, in Scandinavia. Scotland, where's Scotland? Over here. And then all the way over to through Russia, down into the Mediterranean, a little bit, not a very small population there, and also now a little bit in Spain. The Finns have rallied to the osprey cause in an amazing way. They have built hundreds of nests throughout the forest. The problem with forests is that very few of the trees are going to be good for osprey nests. You look at a forest, you see all those trees, and you say, oh, ospreys got it made. They got all these trees. They don't. It turns out that 1 in every 1,000 trees might be able to support an osprey nest. It has to be just the right configuration. So the Finns figure, okay, we can solve that one. We'll just build the nests in the tree. They've built hundreds of these. Ospreys take to them readily, as you might imagine. And they've got a really strong population there. They've got 600 or 800 pairs, almost 1,000 pairs now, I think, in Finland. Keep in mind, this is the land of the midnight sun, so ospreys get to hunt 24 hours a day, which should be doing interesting things in terms of growth and survival. Nobody has really focused in on how day length is affecting that. I think that would be an interesting topic. This is my buddy who is the Finnish osprey guru, Pertti Sorla. He's 77 years old in this photo, and he's still climbing trees. There he is, another osprey bandit. This is a guy who's banded thousands of ospreys. And of course, this is what really makes it all happen in Finland. Finland is a land of small lake, very simple lake cottages. Everybody flees the cities and goes to these little tiny lake cottages, and every one of these cottages has a sauna. So the cottage I lived in with Perry had no running water, no electricity, but it had a sauna. And that's all you needed. You had a lake and a sauna. Reminder of what these ospreys look like when they come out of the egg. They're the same in Europe as they are here. By the way, this is I was checking nests yesterday in my home territory there in Massachusetts, and this is exactly what I was seeing when I put the ladder up to the nest and climbed up and looked over the edge. 2 little heads and 1 egg still ready to pop. The Finns have helped turn ospreys into a tourist attraction. They've built an osprey center, primarily for photographers. And what they've done is taken over an old trout hatchery. Surprise, surprise. Ospreys love trout, and they love fish that are close to the surface. At hatcheries, they are. So people come from all over the world to sit in to rent these blinds. They pay good money to be in them, and to end up getting photographs like this. When I was there, there was a group from Russia and there was a group from Japan who had rented these little blinds by the edge of the trout hatchery, and they were just having a great time and going home happy. Let's think a little bit about Scotland and England because there's a fantastic osprey story there. Ospreys were extirpated from the British Isles. By the 1950s, there were no ospreys left. There might have been one or two or three hidden away here and there, but by and large, they were wiped out. And that all had to do with shooting. Pesticides, again, were not as much of an issue in Europe, and especially ospreys at the large landed estates, the hunting and fishing estates. All of them had gamekeepers. And the main job of the gamekeeper at these huge estates, especially the trout fishing estates, was to make sure that the ospreys didn't take too many trout. And so they shot them all out, essentially. And that happened in Poland, it happened in Spain, it happened in a lot of the Mediterranean. But by the 60s, ospreys were starting to come back. And they came back naturally because the Scandinavian birds migrate through Scotland on their way from Africa up to Scandinavia. And inevitably, a few of them got to England and said, this looks good enough, I don't have to go to Sweden. And they stayed. And that population built up, carefully guarded. Because not only does Scotland and England have people who in the old days like to shoot ospreys, they also have egg collectors. So, and ospreys were a rare species. The eggs were worth hundreds of dollars. So if you get an osprey egg, you were golden. And so the nest had to be very carefully protected. The pattern of land holding in Europe is, I find, very interesting. This is one of the oldest estates. You know, there are hundreds of these, as I'm sure many of you know, hundreds of these estates in England and Scotland. These are estates that could have as much as 100,000 acres. Huge forested areas. Think about it, such a contrast with North America, where most of our major land holdings are government-owned. National parks, national forests, Department of Defense, Bureau of Land Management, all of the really big holdings in America are held by the government. In Europe, there are parks, but much less so. By the way, friends of mine who are gardeners always look at this slide and they say, oh, why can't my garden look like that? And I tell them, your garden would look like that if you had 35 people who showed up at 8 o'clock every morning, every day. Lochs and lakes, again, mostly freshwater foraging for these ospreys in Scotland, although this is an arm of the sea, a loch coming in off the North Sea, and ospreys love to hunt there. They get a lot of flounder there. And again, they've because of the intense interest in Europe in ospreys, they have the local bird group, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, basically their Audubon Society, put together a center for people to come and watch a protected osprey nest. So they basically controlled the crowd. They brought them into one building. They had telescopes set up. Eventually they had a video feed so people could watch the nests. And this protected the birds and gave a lot of people a front row seat on osprey life. And it was really a brilliant concept. This slide is now 15 years old, but at that point, 2 million visitors had already been to Loch Garten. I have no idea how many have come since then, but I think a lot. This is the guy who's jump-started, a wonderful guy, good pal of mine, Roy Dennis. He's the sort of the Scottish wildlife guru, and he was the one who was really spearheaded a lot of the efforts with getting osprey nests back into Scotland, protecting those nests, helping to build artificial nests that the birds could come to, and basically making it all happen. Meanwhile, Scotland was getting the birds, England wasn't, and England was feeling left out. So eventually Scotland had enough ospreys that they could give some young birds to England. And there's a long tradition in birds of prey, something called hacking, where you take the young birds out of the nest before they can fly, move them to a new place, and then that becomes their new home. They lock onto that area as their new territory. So there was a big effort to bring ospreys from Scotland down to England, It was paid for by a local water company, Rutland Water, a huge series of reservoirs. They had tons of money and they liked wildlife. You know, God bless them. And they hired a bunch of people to come in and do this. Very successful operation. Blinds set up so people could watch. Not only that, a big focus on migration. So you can see these little backpack transmitters that these ospreys are using. It was done in England as well, so they could follow where they were going. And you begin to get, as we saw earlier on with the US birds, you can begin to get really detailed information on individual birds, such as we see here. This happens to be Finland. The Finns also put a bunch of satellite transmitters on. But this is interesting because it's a pair of osprey. This is a mated pair that bred during the summer, and then at the end of the summer, they're young-fledged, and they took off. Each of them was wearing one of these transmitters. A couple of key things here. First of all, ospreys don't winter with their mates. They take, as my friend Rob Beauregard says, separate winter vacations. So they're going to different parts of Africa. They're going slightly different routes. Their spring and fall routes are almost the same. You can see they're sort of following their track back. And Rob likes to joke. He says that ospreys will stay, as long as their mate's alive, they will stay mated for life. And Rob said he thinks the secrets to ospreys staying mated for life is that they take separate winter vacations. This is what they have to cover to traverse to get to Africa. It takes them about 4 or 5 days to fly over the Sahara. Keep in mind, the Sahara is not a fish-rich area. So basically they're fasting. They're living off fat. They build up a big layer of fat before they take off on these migrations. They do get to land at night, so they don't have to fly at night. Different from ospreys that are ospreys that are crossing the Caribbean, who can't land on the water. Ospreys are not ducks. They land on the water, they're dead. So they can't get out. They get waterlogged. So they have, from Cuba to Venezuela is about somewhere between a 24 to a 32-hour flight. So they're flying day and night, storms or no storms. And they're navigating in the dark, straight on, till they get to South America. Just absolutely remarkable. Back to Africa, these are the European ospreys wintering here along the coast of Gambia. You can see these are traditional fishermen here in small boats, now being encroached on by more industrial fisheries, primarily Chinese, which is worrisome. One of these boats will take as much fish in one net as all of the ospreys along this coast will eat in 5 years. Very poorly regulated. Most of this fish is going for salmon feed and pet food and chicken food. So it basically gets made into fish meal and is used for that. So we're trading one fish for another. Beautiful beaches here, some of them still traditionally used. You can see these beaches are kind of the thoroughfares. People move food and freight up and down these with these donkey carts, and ospreys are part of the picture. One of the big worries on the wintering grounds are fish ponds. Fish ponds have always been a worry for ospreys going back to medieval times in Europe. The birds are easy to shoot when they come in. Putting nets on these ponds, which would be the real solution, is expensive for these small scale operations like this. There are some big fish farms in South America and in Africa that are all geared up with nets so the birds don't bother them. But that takes capital, it takes investment. I'm pleased to say there are several groups in North America that are now starting to work with some of these smaller fish farms and basically buying them the nets and helping them get set up. Because it's not just ospreys that are getting killed at these fish farms. Lots of other birds, herons, egrets, kingfishers, anything that eats fish is in trouble, can be in trouble. We're probably losing thousands of ospreys every winter at these fish farms, but we've got a lot of ospreys going out there, so so far so good. It doesn't seem to be denting our populations in any significant way. One of the other beauties of ospreys that I just love is how they link continents and cultures. Here you're seeing a high school class in Senegal, West Africa, that is being linked by computer to a high school class in Scotland, where ospreys are nesting. So you've got the people that are living with nesting ospreys talking to the people that are living with wintering ospreys. How cool is that? I'd love to see more of that happening. We could be doing a lot of the same thing, and I'd love to see that happen more here with Canada and the US, where we could link up with schools in places like Colombia and Brazil. And some people are just starting to do that. Last but not least, I want to tell you just a little bit about these hacking projects, this business of moving ospreys around. And I can give you a little bit of a finer point look on this, because these are birds that are coming from the colony that I have been monitoring for years and years. We have 100 pairs of ospreys. We have so many ospreys, we are giving them away. And these are babies that before they fly, that are being put in boxes and heading out to Illinois, where there used to be ospreys breeding up until about 80 or 100 years ago, and they were essentially wiped out. So these are marshes in western Illinois, along the edge of the Mississippi River. And this is a professor from the University of Illinois who has some money, flies in a plane, and picks up a dozen ospreys every year from us. Here they are at 7,500 feet in their little boxes flying out to Illinois and being put in these special towers, these little crates, boxes that are on stilts, where they finish their development. Remember, they can't fly when we take them, so that takes them another 2 weeks or so. They are, once they can fly, they are released. They are fed continually. Our ospreys in our colony sometimes have a tough time. They're dependent on Dad. He's got to be a good fisherman. Some of them are, some of them aren't. We lose somewhere between 15 to 30% of our young in a nest to starvation every year. That's just natural process. In a bad year, we'll lose 50. So these ospreys, and some people at home say, oh, you're taking the ospreys away from our colony. That's so mean and cruel. What are you doing? These are ospreys that get fed 3 times. They get fed better than your dog. They get fed 3 times a day. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet. So for the next month, they are fed up, and until they can fly, continually fed until they leave on migration. But the key thing is, these are birds that are going to lock in on this area. Their little internal GPS, which we still don't understand very well, but probably has a lot to do with Earth's magnetic fields. They are keen in on learning those fields, and learning what home base feels like, looks like, maybe even smells like. And it's that to which they'll be returning every year. And last but not least, building the nest. If you're going to put a lot of new ospreys out in new areas that don't have nests, you've got to build a nest to help bring them back, at least enough to get them started. So there it is. Lots of new ospreys, new generation over the last 50 years. It's a remarkable success story when you think about it. In the time I've been a birder, since the 1970s, many of you know this, we've lost almost 30% of the birds in North America. Not species, but individuals, total number. The numbers are down 30%. Species are doing much, we're not losing a lot of species yet, but there's certainly some worrisome trends there. So when we have a bird that is making such a remarkable comeback, we can do a couple of things. First of all, we can celebrate it. and how wonderful it is that we have ospreys that my kid, the town that my kid grew up in Massachusetts, when she was first born, did not have a single osprey in it. It's got 200 pairs of ospreys nesting in it now. I consider that very wonderful. And not only that, we can learn from it. We certainly can learn on the pesticide side of things, but we can learn how human effort can make a big difference. Because let's face it, a lot of this comeback with Osprey has happened because people cared enough to provide what they needed in the way of nest sites and in the way of protection. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming. Happy to take questions. If anybody needs any more information, guess what? There's a book available. I don't have it here, but you can find it. You can find it online. I'd be tickled if any of you decided you were excited enough about ospreys that you went out and bought a copy of the book. Thanks again. Thanks for coming. Did I do okay?
Yeah. Alan, in a gleaming example for all future presenters, you finished 2.5 minutes. So we've got time. If anybody has one question they would like to ask Alan. Anybody? You.
You mentioned earlier that they like the saltwater or the buoys because they don't have predators. What are some of their predators?
Yeah, good question. Along our coast, raccoons are a big problem.
Do they take adults or mostly just the young?
No, they're taking mostly the young, and eggs, but especially the young. See, what happens when the young, as soon as the young start getting developed, they poop over the edge of the nest. So all of a sudden, there's a scent trail that wasn't there. There's a scent trail that wasn't there before. So eggs, we don't lose that many eggs. We tend to lose more young. The other main avian predators are great horned owls, who every year take some, and again, it's mostly large young that they're taking, and bald eagles. Yep.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Thank you.
For you. If you could step over here for just a second. Most of you in the room know of this ceremony at the Explorers Club. You may not, but we have a challenge coin, and we use it as a tangible sign of appreciation for a job well done. There's a number of stories on the origins of the challenge coin, and a lot of organizations use them. I think their original place was in military organizations. This year, we have a contest every year for the ambassador species. We have an art contest, and we have school students through Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, and they participate, and we have judges, and the winner of the art contest has their image on this challenge coin. It was from a young woman in San Antonio, Texas, Maria Anthony, and she was up here with her mother and grandmother and younger sister a couple of days ago and participated in this ceremony. But anyway, this year's is a salmon, and thank you.